first chairman of Dance in Africa. He didn't dance, though, I think. But he understood the importance. And I love this one. He's an author of his childhood memoir, Whispers of Peace to My Soul. Ladies and gentlemen, I could go on in describing the many contributions of our distinguished lecturer this evening. But I would sum up by saying that as a person who epitomized what many of us and who many of us were, a child of humble beginnings, one of a large family, where, as I used to describe myself, our parents, what they had to give us was not money and material things, but they instilled in us important values. And it is against that background, ladies and gentlemen, that I invite you this evening to help me to welcome a man I describe as a man of integrity, a man who is committed to Barbados and the people of Barbados. And I anticipate that he will deliver a lecture which will meet and indeed exceed the expectations of those who have participated in this Errol Barrow Memorial Lecture over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Mr. Ralph Thorne.
Good evening. I do not mind joining in the protocols and extending a very special welcome and acknowledgement to my friend and colleague for the last 42 years. I call him Prime Minister Stewart. And let me acknowledge the members of the diplomatic corps, my esteemed colleagues, senators, the two W's, Walters and Worrell, General Secretary Pedro Shepherd, the members of the Democratic Labour Party, the supporters of the Democratic Labour Party, and I confidently expect that they are now once again in the majority in Barbados. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank former Senator Maxine for a very generous introduction. Maybe I did not hear, but did you say Wesley Hall as well? Yes. Wesley Hall on King Street. Errol Walton Barrow. They asked me to suggest the title, and I said, it just came out, Senator Worrell, the vision, the mission, from a village to a nation. And I thought that was so poetic. Let me begin by admitting that this is not a surprising topic chosen for a lecture in tribute to our national hero, His Excellency Errol Walton Barrow. Since Mr. Barrow's unofficial titles and accolades have included references that credit him with having transformed Barbados from a village to a nation, immediately we are met with the task of defining these entities, and particularly the village. The village will therefore be a physical and social space that is a ferment of the laboring classes, becoming subject to the authority of the state, the planter, and the merchant. In urban Barbados, the village will exist in the shadow of the merchant, while in rural Barbados, the village will exist in the shadow of the plantation. Social values will then be shaped by a relationship with the school and the church, two institutions that will play dominant roles in shaping identities. It will be a place of material impoverishment, and survival will be dependent not only on the sale of physical labor to an employer, but equally on the exercise of the intellect in creating, in crafting creative modes of survival. Economies will be characterized by scarcity, and conservation will be a quintessential feature of daily living. Nothing is wasted, and excess is looked upon with suspicion. In short, the majority are poor. This is the society into which Errol Barrow is born in 1920. It is an experience that will shape his philosophy for the development of his country out of the status of village and into the more respectable status of nation. Permit me, therefore, to reintroduce you to Frank Collamore's poem, My Land. And this I chose because it offers a portrait of Barbadian society, I think, in the first half of the 20th century. And I quote, "This land, this the land, this the island, this the legendary clay of Atlantis, crowned with tans of coral filigree, outspread upon the lost realm of the diatom. This is the lonely outpost of an alien new world. This the land, or island land. This spot halfway from anywhere to everywhere. This barren land, this fruitful land, this unlikely solitary sister of the Caribbees that lies low and dim upon the thick lace of the waters, this sliver of an old world adrift upon a foreign sea. This our land, our only land. This land of pastel tints and compromise, of huddled tenantries and garden villages, of rum shops and churches, slums and postcard views. This land where sugarcane impersonating wheat deceives the traveler's eyes. This land, often referred to as Little England. This land where the hibiscus and the old world rose, timid wild hare and sly mongoose, dawdling donkey cart and streamlined Cadillac have nodding acquaintance. This land where Sedgemoor sleeps beside the Guinea coast. This halfway postern, this island. This land where Africa and Britain meet in exile, living apart, but yet mingling in haphazard and experimental union to produce the unpredictable mixture, inheriting the pride and arrogance of their lathers and the all-sufficiency of the older tribe. This land of sea eggs, flying fish, rum, and freshwater springs, hatred and love, silver beaches, pullulating population, light and darkness, is much like any other land. A credulous land, a skeptical land, this little island. And yet this land, this island land, this fly speck lined in pale green and mottled white upon the everlasting blue, possesses her own beauty, beauty that life scorns not, yields her womb's increase, individual, independent, my land," unquote. Loving his country and being quintessentially Barbadian, I want to believe that the last lines of that poem found particular and prophetic appeal with Mr. Barrow. And I quote again, "Individual, independent, my land," unquote. This brings us to the strategy by which Mr. Barrow reshaped this land. Let me first tell you a story, though. When we were students at the Cafil campus of the University of the West Indies in the early 1980s, the cafe was run by Sir James Tudor. With our known interest in matters political, a small group of us used to have supper with Sir James every evening. He often told stories of his political life. I remember one evening he told us the story of the immediate aftermath of that famous Democratic Labour Party election victory in 1961. He told us that he was sitting with Mr. Barrow, who asked him, Mr. Tudor, what they could do with that overwhelming mandate from the people. Sir James told us that his immediate reply to Mr. Barrow was in one word: education. According to Sir James, Mr. Barrow said, good, let's do it. A revolution was born. I want now to introduce you to the children birth of that revolution. To do so, I must do a paradoxical thing in introducing you to people that you already know. For the sake of gratitude and national identity, it is now a necessary introduction. American writers in the popular media invented the term baby boomer to refer to a generation of persons whose births took place in the aftermath of World War II. When men returned from that conflict and reunited with the women in their lives, that war ended in 1945. We can therefore safely place that American generation presently between the ages of 70 to 80 years. Our war here was not of the military type. Our war was that war against poverty. And maybe here we can similarly speak of our baby boomers between the age of 70 to 80 years. Earlier in this exercise, I described to you a society that was sharply polarized by the respective possession and non-possession of material wealth. Let us therefore return to our poets. The Guyanese poet Martin Carter writes in a poem called Looking at Your Hands the following lines, and I quote, I have learnt from books, dear friend, of men dreaming and living and hungering in a room without a light, who could not die since death was far too poor, who did not sleep to dream, but dream to change the world, unquote. I want to tell you how those lines so closely personify the physical and spiritual experience of many of our upstanding citizens, to whom I want to paradoxically introduce you, although you know them so well. Most of them spent their adult lives referring to him in whose memory and honor this lecture is given as, and I quote, Mr. Barrow. It was an appellation heavy with reverence and not without good reason. In that society characterized by social and economic polarity, they were of the materially poor. They were the sons and daughters of parents who encouraged them to read from books of men, and I quote again, dreaming and living and hungering in a room without a light, who could not die since death was far too poor, who did not sleep to dream, but dreamed to change the world. Please therefore come with me to the book of John 1, 45 to 46, in the New Testament in the Bible. And I've deliberately chosen the King James Version, and I quote, Philip findeth Nathanael, and saith unto him, We have found, of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Philip saith unto him, Come and see. Beg your pardon. Across these wide expanses of Barbados' Nazareth, it was a revolution of 1961 that made possible the words said by Philip to Nathanael at the end of that conversation. Come and see. Recalling that conversation with Sir James Cameron Tudor, I want to believe that he planted that seed in the mind of Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow on that famous night in 1961, and gave to an entire generation of boys and girls the opportunity not to sleep to dream, but to dream to change the world, their world, our world, so that when we say, come and see, We speak of a generation that carried this country with great skill and commitment to national duty in those post-independence years. Come and see the pastors and the policemen. Come and see the librarians and the lawyers. Come and see the teachers and the tellers. Come and see the bankers and builders. Come and see the priests and postal workers. Come and see the pharmacists and the farmers. Come and see the artists and the artisans. Come and see doctors and dentists. Come and see the managers and masons. Come and see the judges and journalists. Come and see the transformation of a society. Come and see that noble project in education. We therefore come to an understanding that education involves not mere credentialization, but that it elevates an entire society from the primitive to the modern, that it is genuinely developmental, both individually and socially. We often quote Mr. Barrow's famous mirror image speech, delivered in 1986, while not pausing to recognize that it contained as much lament as it did inspiration. 20 years after independence, the father of the nation observed a society in decline in 1986. The people of Barbados heeded his message and overwhelmingly returned the Democratic Labour Party to governmental office on May 28, 1986. Those revolutionaries in education and nation building had done their duty, and they died soon after that election. Almost 40 years onward, we are in the midst of the deepest social crisis of criminal violence that this country has experienced since independence. It becomes a tragic irony that many of the victim participants in this organized violence resemble their humanity only when they lie on the streets in death. That largely unacknowledged and unrewarded generation of Barrow's children that carried this society for some 50 years have either died, retired, or reside on the cusp of retirement. With no material wealth, their parents inculcated in them a sense of values that built a moral ballast of all the institutions that they led or occupied. Albeit with imperfection, no task was justified unless they asked the question, and I quote, "But is it the right thing to do?" Has that question lost its value? Have materialist values substituted for human values? Has the project in education lost its social value? Tragically, this society has lost its characteristic peace, and with the crisis becoming more severe, government seems unsure as to what to do, except to tinker with a few short-term paramilitary strategies of knee-jerk police deployment. I want to suggest, as politely as I may do, that when a government loses its moral authority to govern, nothing that it does will seem like the right thing to do. What I am saying here is that government must behave like a moral agency. A government simply cannot consistently fail to be open and transparent with the public and then seek the confidence of the public that it tries to engage. There is a correlation, therefore, between government's moral conduct and the support which the people will be prepared to give to it. We have consistently asked the government to disclose information pertaining to its spending without satisfactory answer from the government. All this happens while there is evidence of much hardship among significant numbers within the population. It is a truism that austerity must appear to be inflicted on all, and government cannot appear to be exceptional or immune to austere measures as its members jet set across the globe. Those who perpetrate violent crime will express their alienation with an indifference to the agencies of state that are employed to suppress and prevent violence. This is precisely what is happening as violent and murderous crime is committed in public spaces in broad daylight. The agencies of state often can do no more than the bad habits of a government will allow, and an indisciplined government will be rendered lame or impotent. This country now endures the spectacle of a national discussion on alleged prime ministerial, extra-national professional ambitions while on the job. It seems to be an idea that has been sold among the population that ought to consider the inappropriateness of the discussion while our country lurches from one unresolved crisis to another. This is certainly without precedent in our national governance. The national instability in government is further exacerbated by a government that has demonstrated that it is capable of calling an election in the middle of a COVID pandemic, while disenfranchising thousands of voters. I wonder at the self-congratulation for this blatant abuse of power, well within the legal time limits. It was brazen political manipulation. The government seems willing to once again abuse the power that inheres in a system without fixed term limits. It is a terrible deficiency if the government lacks the moral and political stamina to govern for 5 years. The state's social welfare agencies appear to be under severe stress and are demoralized by this loss of public trust that extends to their offices. The unhappy result is disengagement of many citizens from public events sponsored by the state. No amount of money, therefore, will rescue the credibility of such events as we gather in if the public believes that state funds are being expended to further the narrow electoral interests of the party in government. We are into a new dispensation. While the government seems unable or unwilling to seriously confront the high incidence of violent crime, the sinister dimension of a peace program becomes as socially injurious as the diversionary tactic of a threat to penalize innocent citizens for tint on their car windows. The government has given renewed meaning to the cliche of having lost its way. Mr. Barrow and his government presided with wisdom and discipline over the society, and the historical evidence of sage policy suggests that they would have done things differently. It is not for the first time that I have proposed 4 broad approaches to the scourge of crime. No one will dare use the word solution, where the activity now appears to be so highly organized. It will therefore have to be accepted that the various approaches will impact with different immediacy of effect. Permit me, therefore, to state these 4 approaches in order of their immediacy of effect. There's the military, the legislative, the socioeconomic, and the cultural. Let us look first at the military approach, which, as I've suggested to you, has the most immediate effect. Under the Police Act, the Commissioner of Police is responsible for the superintendent of the constabulary. The high command of that agency of state must be permitted to function according to its best judgment without political interference. Instead of establishing a useless and toothless advisory council on crime, the government needs to urgently activate an agency of persons established in offices of national security to seriously advise the government on this crisis and to make a determination as to military options. The brazen perpetration of these shootings in the daylight hours certainly reveals that those involved in these organized acts of violence remain totally indifferent to the peace and may now feel that they can commit these crimes with little resistance. crime is hurting not only its primary victims, but threatens to ruin an entire society. Let us go to the legislative approach. Of course, I'm submitting to you that the military approach has the most immediate social effect and impact. But there's a place called Parliament, and Parliament is responsible for that second approach, the legislative approach. In 2024, the government admitted in Parliament that it was passing a new Bail Act in response to my call for more decisive legislation against murderous recidivism. I continue to describe the new Bail Act as cowardly and restrained, while exporting the issue of implementing a stricter regime of bail to the courts. In other words, our Parliament had the opportunity to pass a Bail Act in the context of crisis. They added a few lines to the old Bail Act and passed the responsibility of the denial of bail to the courts. That act did nothing new. I remind the government that Section 48 of the Barbados Constitution mandates Parliament to pass laws for, and I quote, the peace, order, and good government of Barbados. Once again, I am pressing this government to pass anti-gang legislation to pursue what appears to be highly organized, violent crime. I have also previously advocated for a new regime of law that introduces degrees of homicide that will make for greater certainty in sentencing. Please do not take this without the seriousness that I intend. The disappearance of the street character Ninja Man from public view raises questions as to human rights. The public has an interest in inquiring about this conspicuous absence of a fellow citizen. I pause and remind myself of the poem by the European poet Niemöller, and I summarize it where he says that they came for the communists, and I was not a communist, so I said nothing. They came for the trade unionists, they came for the socialists, they came for the Jews. Don't think he said it, but let us add that he came for the blacks. And no one spoke. And at the end of that verse, he says, and then they came for me. And there was no one left to speak for me. And that is why I ask you to take it with some seriousness, wherever he is. That character called Ninja Man, if there is some firm account, let that firm account be given. But he too has his human rights. Let us go to the socioeconomic approach. I hold up the recent money-incentivized football competition for young men as an example of government's lazy approach to solving the problem of restlessness and hopelessness among our young people. That tournament was typical of government's recklessness in the expenditure of public monies. The Barbados Football Association now has the problem of asking the same players to play for community pride. Meanwhile, we ask government whether it is true that the budget for the Community Development Department has been reduced, much to the displeasure of some who work within that department. If you ask that question with me, it is legitimate inquiry. The government has destroyed the ambience of community playing fields while claiming that they're erecting mini stadia. The construction of hostile fences around these recreational areas in communities has become a joke in poor taste. These social spaces have lost that organic relationship with the communities that they're intended to serve. I intend no pun in saying that violence has killed spontaneous and constructive social interaction within many of our communities. The fences have now demarcated the burial spaces for the death of community life. There has been no indication from government that it intends to actively participate in or exercise its influence in programs that treat sport as a career option for young people. We looked on in horror as the Barbados Defense Force sports program was suspended. The government needs to modernize the National Sports Council to integrate with the several sports associations and this University of the West Indies for the establishment of an Academy of Sports that will graduate our young athletes into international competition. As to job creation, the government continues to display a lack of creative thought in relation to the crisis of high unemployment among the youth. There have been legitimate voices of protest against the government, limiting the aspirations of young people to street sweepers, and most recently, gully repair. Our aspirational young people now seek the path of emigration, while the word opportunity is most used as an explanation for their flight. There continues to be a dissonance between local aspiration and government's public desire to attract foreign investment in the local economy. Beyond these programs of casual labor, the government has not made any serious investment in young people within the Barbadian economy. I have often lamented the terrible message of self-negation in a government that has expressed a clear preference for foreign skills to occupy the highest reaches of our important public entities, such as the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. As one of Sagari Sobers' biggest fans, I will always remain unapologetic in defense of our Barbadian skills in every area of human endeavor. As a proud graduate of this outstanding University of the West Indies, I take deep offense at this practice that has been justified by one government minister as constituting a search for, and I quote, the best minds. Ironically, I go to Shakespeare, who said it best. O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Unquote. And when men lose their reason, and women, it appears that our young people also lose their professional lives. As recently as last week, in a heated parliamentary debate, the Minister of Agriculture spoke of a reluctance of young people to get involved in agriculture because, according to him, the sun was too hot. Our Minister of Agriculture has clearly lost touch with the aspirations of young people in agriculture. The removal of lands permanently out of agriculture seems callous and arbitrary. There are several abandoned houses and empty parcels of land across Barbados within communities. Apart from this, there is a need to upgrade the housing stock for the benefit of those who live in substandard accommodation. In addition, too many of our communities are depressing for the appearance of untidy streets. I believe that we need to encourage a sector of builders to rebuild many of the houses across urban and suburban Barbados with accessible and affordable funding from agencies that will be established as genuinely private public sector entities with the government. The prospects for high employment of local labor in such a scheme will be great. For the more tasteful, I envision a restoration of communities of housing in the old Barbadian designs of great aesthetic appeal. May we all pause and celebrate the lives of those little old men who used to turn up on the bicycle with the brown bike strapped across the bar and a saw sticking out and a hammer somewhere and a chisel somewhere. And doing what they did the most outstanding work that has ever been done in this country. There's also was intellectual labor. There's also was intellectual work. Yet we do not celebrate them. Yet we deny them. May we not train our young people, our young artisans, our young carpenters, our young scientists to learn the skills that those old men learned without formal tuition, without O-levels. I believe it used to be called in those days seventh standard, except that we've lost our standards. One of my enduring criticisms relates to emerging residential environments in which the houses lack that local aesthetic appeal. Under this program of urban and suburban renewal, I envision much specialized construction work for our Barbadian workers for many years to come. On the matter of health, it is clear that public health delivery is in crisis, with a fairly high complement of public and private health facilities across Barbados. The problem cannot be exclusively infrastructural. I must do something unusual. Is that Bobby Morris there? Robert, I apologize to you. I celebrate you. Welcome. We may need to investigate integrated health delivery schemes between the private and public practitioners in healthcare. You will note that I have stopped short of describing or prescribing a national health service. I believe that they're conscientious and compassionate medical practitioners, including nurses, who are willing to render service within integrated schemes of health delivery. I tread carefully in saying that it is not impossible to create an integrated scheme of private participation within public health delivery systems. While deferring to those professionals within the field, I believe that such a scheme remains worthy of consideration. There must be no compromise on the delivery of adequate health care. And a new government must commit to accessible health care for all. And that is irrespective of the patient's social circumstances. Let there never in this country be a compromise on the institution of health that was created by Errol Walton Barrow. I turn to the cultural approach. I have chosen to categorize the institution of education within the cultural approach to planning a future for this country. I consider education to be a cultural agency, insofar as it is an institution that transmits values. It's not about books and classrooms. In its purest sense, education is about the transmission of values from one generation to another. And it is not restricted to skill acquisition, but it is about character. And as Right Excellent Errol Barrow would have said, it is about nation building. Errol Barrow rested his development model on educating the people of Barbados. Education must continue to be the platform on which we build and rebuild this country. Earlier, I referred to that generation of Mr. Barrow's children who carried this country across the post-independence era of national development. I described them as having completed their tour of duty. I want to recommend this new and re-energized Democratic Labour Party to be the government that will guide the ship of state across the choppy seas of its next voyage. Barbados is in deep crisis. Earlier, I explained the paradox of introducing you to someone you knew. He, and as we lawyers say, the male shall include the female, only to avoid cumbersome language. He was born in a country where there was no universal adult suffrage. And when the vote became universal, education still was not. The word privilege meant more than merit. That conversation between Cameron Tudor and Errol Barrow would reshape Barbados from a village to a nation. Any threat to the noble institution of education is an existential threat to this nation. I join with those many Barbadians who believe that our system of education requires curricular reform and that there must be no disturbance done to that foundational structure that liberated Mr. Barrow's children. Permit me again, Martin Carter. I have learned from books, dear friends, of men dreaming and living and hungering in a room without a light, who could not die since death was far too poor, who did not sleep to dream but dreamed to change the world, unquote. Leaving their primary schools, housed in generous church halls, he went to the Modern. She went to Queen's College. He went to Aline. She went to Wakefield. Lodge was in the middle of the plantation fields. Harrison College was in the middle of the merchant buildings. Combermere and Springer were full of energy and optimism, foundation the melting pot. Mr. Edwards had his own version of the federal experiment. And there were more, and many more. On Sundays, they went to church, often twice, sang in choirs, and wept in solo at home because the journey seemed so long. And they became tired. Yet they persevered. Education was holistic. By the triumph and evolution of merit over privilege, Frank Collamore's, and I quote, huddled tenantries met the garden villages, and dawdling donkey cart and streamlined Cadillac developed more than nodding acquaintance, to quote him. Here was a nation taking shape. Here was a peace given to us. Here was justice given to us. The etymology of the word education may well tell us that it is a process of elevation by leadership. Let us therefore urgently educate our young people. Let us introduce them to Mr. Barrow's children. Bobby Morris, you are one of Barrow's children. Let us therefore introduce them to Mr. Barrow's children, whom they know and yet do not know. Barbadians, the urgency of this historical moment tells me that this is your time. This is our time. This is our time because the scourges of the 5 apocalyptic horsemen are upon us, and dreadfully so. Those horsemen are corruption, cost of living, crime, culture of moral decay, and constitutional conundrum. For ease of memory, I began all of them with C: corruption, cost of living, crime, culture of moral decay, and constitutional conundrum. I challenge this government to bring into law the integrity legislation and to plead its defense against charges of corruption. I repeat, I challenge this government to bring into law the integrity legislation, and then and only then will we hear its pleas, its defense against charges of corruption. I challenge this government to crawl out from its hiding place and attain to price controls on behalf of a population that is suffocating from high prices. In addition, I call on this government to return to a serious resuscitation of the agricultural sector and save the people from the arbitrary food prices fixed by foreign entities. Let us look to our fields for the food, and let us not look to the Bridgetown port for our food. I call upon this government to establish a relationship with the Barbados Light and Power Company that seeks also to defend the interests of consumers. The time for courage is now. And the Barbados Light and Power Company is not a sacred cow. It is a corporate citizen in this country. And if we believe that the relationship between the light and power and government endures and endures to the disadvantage of the citizens of this country, let us be courageous enough to say that. High electricity bills drive inflation. High electricity bills drive a high cost of living. Enough said on that. And if this tired government cannot do these things, a new Democratic Labour Party government will. Something seems rotten in the state of Denmark. I must not be afraid to say that high electricity rates, again, are related to high inflation in this country and that the government seems compromised. Barbadians, this is your time. In short time, our team of economists will caucus on the matter of this country's future relationship with the IMF. For the time being, I will say to Barbadians who are enduring severe hardship and who have lost their jobs, our local version of IMF means is motley fault. By popular demand. In short time, our team of economists will caucus on the matter of this country's future relationship with the IMF. For the time being, I will say to Barbadians who are enduring severe hardship and who have lost their jobs, our local version of IMF means is motley fault. I have already in this lecture given specific proposals that are designed to address crime in the immediate and long term. We are in a time of moral decay, and the government must now answer to charges of complicity for its active promotion of hedonistic behaviors among young people. Mr. Barrow's children are afraid. that his grandchildren are now swept up in a culture of revelry as an end in itself, and that the young people's lives are bereft of any spiritual engagement. The National Cultural Foundation must now answer to charges that it seems to have prioritized events of wild revelry over wholesome and uplifting artistic expression. That agency seems to be manipulating and suppressing the element of protest in calypso. The agency must say whether it has instituted a practice of requiring singers to submit their compositions for scrutiny as a condition of financial assistance. These are fair questions in defense of fundamental constitutional rights to freedom of expression. Meanwhile, our young people continue to be exposed to lyrics that are abusive of their juvenile status, while too many politicians avoid these moral positions through fear of sacrificing their own perceived popularity. I call on the National Cultural Foundation to assume its role of genuinely facilitating artistic expression. We in the Democratic Labour Party government, we in a Democratic Labour Party government will condemn this government for committing millions of dollars to a regathering festival intended to promote the partisan electoral interests of the ruling party under the guise of a national event. I'll read that again. We in the Democratic Labour Party condemn this government for committing millions of dollars to a regathering festival intended to promote the partisan electoral interests of the ruling party under the guise of a national event. This Democratic Labour Party will not support this improprietous use of public funds. Our schools must once again become places of deep and serious academic and intellectual training. These moral positions are not rooted in conservatism. These positions are rooted in decency. Government and its agencies seem to have placed themselves in places from which return is impossible. Barbadians, this is your time. The confusion of our public life continues to be worse confounded by a Republican status that continues to rest within a Westminster Constitution. The people must demand a genuinely new Republican Constitution that is sovereign and representative of the people's interests, while also curbing the powers of a prime minister against excess. A genuinely democratic exercise of consultation should be completed in no less than 18 months. We have not had that. The consultation has been inadequate to fit the meaning of the word consultation. And Barbadians continue to reject the government's seeming intention to obliterate the name of Errol Walton Barrow from the annals of history. And to obscure the significance of independence from the cultural and political consciousness of Barbadians. For as long as this country shall live, November 30th every year must continue to be a celebration of independence and nothing else. Barbadians, this is your time. For as long as this country shall live, the name Errol Walton Barrow will resonate through all these fields and hills, and there will be no recall. Barbadians, this is your time. Barbadians, this is your time. Will you take it? Thank you very much.
Can we give him another round of applause, please? It was excellent. You all may be seated. Opposition leader, you ran off the stage so quickly. There's a question and answer segment. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you to come back on the stage. There will be a floating mic in the audience. So for any persons who would like to ask any questions, please raise your hand and introduce yourself before you start speaking.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Good.
Kenneth Armstrong.
That's
Kenneth Armstrong.
Hello, Kenneth.
I sat here in awe, sir, at your lecture this evening.
Thank you.
Your vision is indeed clear for this country.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you, sir, for articulating that vision.
Thank you.
My question to you is, where do we go from here? All seems lost, sir. All seems lost. And my question to you, where do we go from here as a nation?
Two destinations immediately. A place of courage and a place of wisdom. And you and I, Kenneth, believe in the scriptures. And we know that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And the fear of the Lord is about humility. But humility is not weakness. And we must have courage in the face of an oppressive government. And when I speak of an oppressive government, I'm not talking about a government that has soldiers walking the streets with guns. I'm talking about a government that, in its practices, continues to be hostile to the interests of people. You've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. We have met a government that refuses to disclose its spending in an environment where children in this country are not going to school because their parents have no money to give them breakfast and have no pocket money to give them to take to school. We were canvassing with this young lady to my left, and we learned that and I'm going to say it every time, that there are 14 and 15-year-old boys in this country who are not going to school. And they're going to the gas stations and catching the chickens. You see the numbers have diminished, haven't you? And they're selling them for $10 each to give to their mothers to cook food. And yet we in this country are afraid to ask government to be accountable for the state of this country. And fear will get us nowhere. Kenneth, let us go to that destination of courage. They can't kill us. They can't kill us. Not all. But let us go to places of courage. And let us go to places of wisdom. And let us continue to ask government the questions, the answers to which will make our situations better, will make us understand what is happening in this country. And they expect me to say it, and I will say it. Do you think that it is fair that you should live in a country that is spending millions of dollars on prime ministerial travel on private jets while little children are starving? The two are related one to the other. They are related one to the other. It's all about government expenditure. It is about a welfare department whose funds are low. It is about a welfare department which is turning people away because people have become insistent and persistent, and they're considered nuisances because they continue to visit the department so often. While this government is spending millions of dollars on luxuries. So let us find those places of courage. And as a friend of mine told me this week, and it's the best advice I've had, feed your faith. He's here. And starve your fear.
Kenneth, thank you very much for the question. Yes, you can go ahead.
Sorry. Good night. My name is Django Wheats.
Django.
Django Wheats.
Hello, Django.
And I am a student in the Faculty of Biological Science and Chemical Science.
Congrats.
My question is,
Biological sciences?
yes, and chemical sciences.
Yes.
So my question is, with regards to your speech, if you're talking about the excuse of opportunity being the reason for the younger, about opportunity
Yes.
being the reason for the younger generation who may be skilled or have background education within fields like mine, going over to those countries. My question is, what is the incentive that the DLP plan to provide for us, as in terms of when you spoke about agriculture, something that came up to my mind is that as a younger person who does biochemistry and chemistry, you see all of these developments in terms of applying science to agriculture overseas. But in Barbados, you tend to see, you don't really see it applied here. It's like science is on a back burner. And therefore, there's no incentive for us to do it here, That's why we go overseas. My question is, as someone that stated that, Errol Barrow moved to a less conservative view, like, how do we plan to expand, How do we leave that conservative mentality in terms of our culture and actually apply what is being learned in modern science to our culture? What is the incentive for us to renovate industries within Barbados so that we as younger people actually have opportunities over here than over there? What are your thoughts on that, or an overview on that topic?
Thank you, Django.
Excellent
Thank you.
question.
And Django, you made my answer a lot easier because you answered a part of it. Agriculture, look, you drive by several parts of Barbados, and it is extremely painful to see bulldozers taking off the topsoil, rich topsoil, and exposing limestone. And on top of that will go concrete. And agriculture is dead in that locality forever. The fact is, we have the physical resource here. We have the land here. We have the people here. But when we destroy the land, what must the people do? And that is why I said in my address here tonight that the use of land, the land use policy of this Barbados Labour Party must be immediately reversed. That young people must be given the opportunity to literally go to the fields. Yes, they must be given that opportunity. One of the things that, and you would have heard me say that Errol Barrow rested the development of this country on education. And education does not mean 6 years in Lodge or Combermere or Harrison College. You would have heard me say that education stretches far beyond that. And it is about having an appreciation for your country and having a knowledge of your country and knowing what are the resources in your country. This country has resources. And you would have, well, you're too young to have heard about it, but we used to, our mantra used to be, the people are our best resource, and that is still true. The people are still our best resource. And our land is still our best resource. What are we going to do? Are we going to build up the coastline with hotels? Are we going to do that? Or are we going, and that is foreign investment. The time has come when we must consider indigenizing this economy, and by that I mean reaching into our local resources, our local human and physical resources, and developing a local economy around that.
Thank you very much, Janko, for the question.
Comrade Leader, I would
Hi. Yes, Bobby.
crave your indulgence
Yes, please.
in allowing me to ask my question
Yes.
and make my comment seated.
And welcome to Mrs. Morris as well.
And I ask that of my colleagues in the audience also.
Yes.
I am fully supportive of your raising the issue of agriculture
Yes.
to position number one in taking our country forward. From the simple perspective that I'm sure all of us can share here. From the time there was a Barbados, there was agriculture. there was no tourism. There was no offshore banking and finance. There were no industries. The industries that Mr. Barrow put at the harbor and at Newton and at Six Roads, those were developed. But Barbados has always had agriculture. Every country that we know that has succeeded
Yes.
has done that around agriculture as its base. Your position that you are taking in terms of taking lands out of agriculture into dubious experiments are not clearly expressed. And at any rate, whatever is expressed, we can also form our own conclusions in terms of the thrust towards housing for particular elite types and by particular elite types who are involved in it. So I will let you to continue
Yes.
to put that thrust on agriculture. It's very important for us. But I wish you also to recognize that the sea is part of that agriculture, if you want to call it too. Mm-hmm. It's about food. The sea is important. And when you stand up and you defend and ask the best for the fishermen, I thank you, because you're operating not only as a man who defends labor in its widest sense, but you are defending the interests of our future. Fishermen.
Thank you.
Of course, you and I have had the privilege and opportunity to represent the same constituency.
Yes.
And I wish you to be there for a long time. I want you to understand that.
Thank you.
And I am going to say to you, I will be putting all of my resources, and that's not money, as you know. But the fact is that I have not lived in that area all my life, that I cannot walk with you and talk with you and speak with you and entreat my people to come out and support you. Take agriculture as that theme and carry it forward. And I would like to say this to you.
Yes.
I admire what you're doing. I tell anybody. The Honorable Frandel Stewart, my friend for life, who is there, he's a decent man.
That's right.
Like Ralph Thorne is a decent man. Nobody will hold up their names in Barbados. We are afraid. A lot of Barbadians are afraid to talk about what they're seeing. But this country is not the country that we came up in. It's not the country of Errol Barrow.
That's right.
It is a strange country.
Yes.
But you know what? My children and grandchildren have to live in it. So I want the best people to take the reins of government and change the direction that we're in. Blessings to you, sir. And I wish you all the best as you continue on your journey. Bless you.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you very much, Comrade Bobby.
And on the question of agriculture, Bobby, there is a greenhouse, relatively small greenhouse. I would not identify the parish because I think people are entitled to their privacy, even commercial privacy. And that greenhouse is supplying most of the lettuce to the supermarkets across Barbados. Maxine, is that true? Yes. Yes. And it was Lennox Chandler who told me a few months ago that he said, look, you don't need a young entrepreneur can grow his crops in a container or a greenhouse so that we can maximize the use of our land. You see, there has always been the problem, and I think the minister reflected it when he spoke. We see labor as marginal, and we see fishing labor as marginal. Some people who just do what they do, we go and buy the fish, but We don't see that as within the mainstream of our life. If you go to Cape Shepherd and buy a shirt, well, that's mainstream. But if you go to the market and buy fish, well, that's marginal activity. It's neither here nor there. And that is the perception that we have. And you and I are preaching in the same pulpit, more or less. That is a problem in Barbados, that we have marginalized labor, and we have reduced the value of labor to this society. And aquacultural labor, as you've said, and agricultural labor, we see it as marginal. It is something that is neither here nor there. It may be here today, gone tomorrow, and when it's gone tomorrow, we're at the mercy of WTO. And let the people of Barbados understand that the American government subsidizes its farmers in a way that makes it profitable for them to export to these countries. And we had a press conference, and a young lady probably in her mid-30s, stood up and said, spoke to you about it, Maxine. You were trying to get in touch with her. She wants land. She wants a plot of land on which to work. And it hurt me a few weeks ago. I said this in the house, but I'm going to say it here in this more decent house. That I drove to Bullins Agricultural Station, and I looked at the work being done, and the soil was rich, except that at the gate I was met by a man from the east, a Chinese man, and he told me that he is in charge of the project. And I played innocent and asked him a few more questions, and he said he'd like to stay here, that he loves this country. And he is supervising a group of young Barbadian men, and I questioned them as well, and I asked them, you're going to move in one of these houses? And all of them said, no, man, we can't afford them. And this government is walking around Barbados telling people that they're providing housing for poor people. It is simply not true. A lot of these housing projects, they're more about real estate and less about housing. It is about real estate transactions that is making somebody rich. That is the kind of government we have. That is the kind of administration we have. And that is why, Kenneth, we need courage. Not only to know the truth, but to speak the truth. And you don't have to speak it through a microphone, but speak it on WhatsApp, the powerful medium called WhatsApp that will assist in changing this government. This country is in crisis. Bobby, I thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Renette Dumont,
Hello, Renette.
and the opposition leader. Thank you for a very informative and educational lecture. It is an area that I wrote about in the last election leading up to the 22 election, and it's something that I'm always advocating for. And I think that the 30th of November should always remain the 30th of November, and it should not be mixed with anything else. But it must remain so. And I thank you for promoting and for mentioning that.
Thank
and
you.
for ending with that.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. And 250 years later, one of the more powerful names in America is George Washington. 250 years later.
Absolutely.
And we have people around in this country, some of whom describe themselves as political scientists, telling the young people of this country that the name Barrow means nothing.
All right. But the name Barrow means something.
Of course it does.
Yes. And
In the United States, they have a consciousness that Washington means something 250
Absolutely.
years later. And 250 years, if the world survives, it will still mean something.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
We must be able to teach that to individuals and
Yes.
remind young people
Yes.
of the legacy.
Yes.
Each prime minister will have their legacy, and the Errol Walton Barrow legacy must be
Yes.
taught
Yes, thank
and
you.
preserved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Renette.
They want to disjoin the young people in this country. I describe Bobby's generation as he is one of Barrow's children, Errol Barrow's children. And his children and the generation after him would obviously be the grandchildren. And there are people walking around here trying to disjoin the generation that comes after Bobby's from the name Errol Barrow. And that is, I don't know how to describe it. sacrilege. It's wrong. It's morally wrong, morally and politically wrong. It is destructive of a legacy. You use the word legacy. It is destructive of a legacy. A legacy is something that feeds the soul of every generation that comes after. And when that legacy becomes broken, there's a loss of identity. And the sociologists will tell you that is why these young men can walk up to each other and shoot them in their head. They are disjoined from us. Education, lack of education, lack of an appreciation of a legacy, lack of an appreciation of what it meant to live in a peaceful society. That's gone. That's gone. How are we going to restore it? When a government is reinforcing the destruction of that legacy to the disadvantage of young people. Some are taking flight, and some are staying here and involving themselves in deviance.
I would like to thank everyone who asked questions so far, and we will take one more question before we, well, two more questions before we close off the question and answer segment.
Good night. Protocols already established.
That sounds like Jeff.
Jefferson Trotman.
Hello, Jeff.
I think I'm responsible for you coming over to the Democratic Labour Party. A conversation we would had at Briar Hall.
Briar Hall, I remember that afternoon.
And you remember the great quote from the Right Honourable Flanders Stewart, these mice have no balls.
Yes, he did hung me and harass me that afternoon at a cricket game. I think your team lost, though.
Yes, we did.
But Jeff, I want to thank you for that conversation.
Yeah, I know you're responsible. You should thank me. I know you're responsible for you coming over. However, my question to you, as the leader of the party, most of the functions I attend, I see a vintage age. How do we get young people back to the party? How do we get young people following the Democratic Labour Party again and giving them a place in the Democratic Labour Party?
Jeff, you need to come down here and look.
No, this understand what I'm saying. This understand what I'm saying. As I traverse Barbados and I speak to young people, they're turned off from the Democratic Labour Party. What I'm saying is, how do we get these people turned on and back in the bosom of the Democratic Labour Party? How do we get them from this partying and this juve and this crime and violence? How do we set up programs and structure them in a way to recapture these young minds?
Jeff, people follow parties because of C-A-U-S-E. 5 letters, cause, a cause. What is our cause? We need to identify a cause in this country. We as politicians need to identify a cause. And I can tell you, with the oppressive practices of this government, a cause is evolving. A cause against oppressive government. A cause against a government that is not transparent. I mean, this government is doing so many things wrong, Jeff. But we have to enlighten our young people because they're disjoined. Mr. Barrow died in 1987 at the age of 67. And have we identified the cause that he fought for? Have we reinforced the importance of education? Have we? Have we adequately identified that cause? Or are we only now recognizing that it is a cause because the Barbados Labour Party government has been trying to destroy that legacy, that cause of education? So, Jeff, we need to identify causes in defense of social justice. And anytime there's a threat, as I said in my presentation, a threat to education is an existential threat to the Barbados that we know, to the Barbados that we're losing, to the Barbados that some of us think we have lost. How do we convey to young people that the country in which they live, and this is the only country they know, my generation and Bobby's and former Prime Minister Stewart's, we've known 2 Barbadoses. We've lived in the other one, and now we're existing in this one. How do we get that message to young people that the Barbados that they live in is not what we call normative? It is not normative. Yes, so it's about message, and it's about the cause. Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks for that conversation at Briar Hall.
And to our next speaker, when you introduce yourself, also introduce your age.
Good evening. My name is Rory Paris. I'm 9 years old, and my question
Where are you,
today-
Corey?
Rory.
Rory. Hello, Rory.
Like,
Zori.
Oh, Zori. Thanks for coming. Speak to that man called Jeff.
my question today is, if we become the government, what are your plans to to end the violence?
End the violence. Okay. Excellent question. I will try, Zori, to answer you in, how old are you? 9?
9.
She's 9?
9, yes.
Right, and you're at primary school. All right, when you go back to primary school, I want you to tell your colleagues that there are 4 ways or four approaches. Which school are you at, please? St. Albans, St. James. Well, you tell your people at school that there are 4 basic ways in which you will end violence. And the first one is to strengthen your police, okay? And by that, I don't mean lift weights. Okay? You give them, you empower them. And one of the ways of empowering, you know that word, right? Strengthen. And I want to say to you, Zori, that our police officers who form a line of protection between us and violent crime, they are not well paid. They are not well paid. And I am almost embarrassed to tell you how much constables are paid per month. And apart from being not well paid, are you a prefect? No. Are you the class monitor? She is?
She only in class.
In 3. Well, every class has a monitor. Anyhow, our police officers don't enjoy good terms of service. Let me try to speak simply. They do not treat our police officers well in terms of pay, salary. You know what is salary, right? They don't give them good salaries, and they do not promote them. So when you go in, you are a constable. And I would think that within a few years, you expect to become a sergeant, and then a station sergeant, and then an inspector, and then an assistant superintendent. You want to be promoted. You're not going to be in class 3 for the rest of your life. You're going to be promoted. And I want you to know, Zori, that our police officers are doing a wonderful job in this country in very difficult circumstances. Okay? So we call that the military approach. And I spoke earlier of a socioeconomic. And I will say this to you simply. The government has to create an environment in which when Zori leaves school at our university, you will go to university, I'm sure, and you come out and graduate 23, 24, 25, that you can feel that you live in a country that will have something for you to do because your parents can't support you forever. Yeah. Okay? And then there's there's Parliament. Parliament, I'm not going to burden you with that, but this one I want to speak to you about. And it is called the cultural approach to the issue of violence. And Zori, should I say this? Look, there was a video of people your age, children, doing something that they should not do. You know what I'm talking about, right? Dancing in that suggestive way. And that has become a part of, what's the word? Culture. And it is a culture of violence because that behavior that your mommy does not want you to express, that is a form of violence. Being a form of disrespect. When a boy goes up behind a girl and abuses her by gyrating on her in public. Yes, you following me? So that is the cultural question. We need to, can't use the word reorient, but we need to teach our young children respect and kindness and generosity and love. Love is difficult. You can't look around at the 28 people in your class and love all of them. We don't. We are adults and we don't love everybody, but you have to try. You go to Sunday school? Which one? Oh, they took the microphone from her.
Yes.
Spikestown, excellent choice. I know Miss McLean. I know Miss McLean wanted you at the Spikestown Anglican. But Zuri, it's about your behavior, your conduct. And we want our young people to grow up in a society in which there's respect and love and generosity and kindness. You don't insult people, that kind of thing. Okay?
I know I said we had one last question, but we have one last one. You can go ahead.
Hi, good night. My name is Zachary Haddock.
Zachary.
Zachary, yes.
Hello,
I
Zachary.
was invited by Mr. Tennyson Springer. This is my father, Michael Haddock.
That's one of Barrow's children.
Yeah. 25
Welcome.
years old.
How many?
Yes, 25.
25.
To Jeff's question, I think something that we don't pay enough attention to in the Caribbean revolves around the evolving nature of media. We don't use media as effectively as we should. Neither
Zachary,
party.
we met at the Combermere meeting?
No, we didn't. I
Okay.
did go to Combermere.
All right. Yes.
So, yeah.
I'm sorry. You go on.
But yes, media is important. I think we saw that in the 2024 elections in the
Yes.
US. The changing dynamic of podcasts and online media that isn't so traditional is very, very important to reaching the youth. The youth are present on Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp stories, stuff like that. They're not present on CBC or the other traditional forms of media. But the main thing that I wanted to mention, you mentioned that education is supposed to serve as the medium for the transmitting of values
Yes.
across generations.
Yes.
And I think to some extent that's true, but I think what's more important is the family unit. I think there's a big correlation that we've seen historically. Thank you. I think there's a, what was I saying?
A correlation between the family
right.
unit.
I think there's a big correlation that we've seen throughout history, especially in the 20th century with the family structure and how it has resulted in great nations like the United States, the Scandinavian countries such as Denmark and Sweden and
Yes.
Norway, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
And I think in Barbados, we've lost the importance of the family structure, the nuclear family structure. We've lost the importance of marriage. We've lost the importance of children and raising them in a society and in a family that's built on those foundational values.
Yes.
You talk about young people not having like a vision or something to aim at in life, especially our young men.
Yes.
I think the thing that can empower a lot of young men and can make them really want to get up and do what's right is when they think about their daughters and their sons and the legacy they want to leave behind for them.
Thanks for mentioning the Scandinavian countries. The Scandinavian countries have very, very protective social systems. From the time a child is born, he is protected by a social welfare system. I've always found it ironic that mothers, young mothers, have to support a child from 0 to 5, and then that child can go to school free. So you ask yourself, but why are you going to school free from 5? But you have to, when the child is at its most vulnerable, it's an expense. And that's something we seem not to have thought about. Whereas those Scandinavian countries, they've used their oil wealth very wisely, Norway especially, and they have very, very strong social welfare systems that protect children from the age of 0 right through. Yeah, but consider family, reconsider family as that what we call the extended family, to include the grandmother, because the absence of the grandmother and the aunt from the house has had what I would call deleterious effect on the children. Yeah, in a sense, the extended family means that there's always an adult in the house. You know what we used to do when the parents are out in this nuclear family, but there's a grandmother there watching, the eagle eye watching. And that's the strength and the power of the extended family. But again, in the Caribbean, we have elevated to our middle class lives and we have pursued that European concept of nuclear family. And the children sometimes don't see the grandparents. And that's tragic. And that weakens the society, because we are talking about transmission of values. A child in a house alone with his TikTok or whatever you all call it, and the parents at work, and the grandmother somewhere in St. Lucie. I apologize to the St. Lucie people. And that transmission of values is not occurring. Yeah, so reconsider family, concepts of family. But thanks for the question. You sound like a very decent young man. Don't let anybody, as I said in my presentation, make you believe that wholesome values make you any less than the other person or should make you any less popular than the other person. Don't be afraid to stand alone. if you know and feel and believe that you're standing on moral values, that you're standing for what is right, because there's a lot, Zachary, going on around you that is wrong. And if you stand alone, you'll be fine.
Thank you very much, Zachary, for your questions. This brings the question and answer segment to an end. I would like to invite Ms. Sherilyn Waldron, a member of the Young Democrats Executive and a General Council member, as she would now give the opposition leader a gift for his presentation. Can you come to the left of me, Ralph? Thank you very much. Have a good night.